Chair recognizes the gentleman from Colorado.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We all share the goal of reducing the deficit. If we are serious about deficit reduction, we need to look at defense as one of the line items. My amendment would save hundreds of millions of dollars by reducing our troop count in Europe. Instead of having over 80,000 troops in Europe where they're no longer needed, we would reduce the amount of troops in Europe to 35,000. This would allow the Department of Defense to save money by closing bases across Europe that don't have any strategic rationale. Pulling our troops out of Europe and closing these bases is an excellent way to help reduce expenditures and save money. My amendment would only cut 7,500 troops, which would save $278 million. An additional 35,000 troops would be available for deployment to actual theaters where we have a strategic interest in. So it would enhance our preparedness at the same time as saving money. This step would save $278 million and improve our national security. Reducing our troop levels save money, personnel costs, housing expenses, the cost of stationing troops abroad. On top of these savings, my amendment will allow us to close bases across Europe that are, quite frankly, Mr. Chairman, are relics of a bygone era. Rather than fighting the demons of the past, we need to focus on the very real threats of the present and the future. We are no longer in a battle with the Nazis. We are no longer in a battle with the Soviets. The need for these bases was understandable in a different geopolitical context. But what is their justification now? The U.S. taxpayer did not send up to defend wealthy European democracies from imaginary threats forever. These bases cost U.S. taxpayers millions and millions of dollars. I fail to understand why we're wasting money to maintain bases where they aren't needed. Our European allies are some of the richest countries in the world. Why are we subsidizing their defense spending? Our European allies have enjoyed a free ride on the American dime for years now. Today they spend on average only 2% of GDP on defense, while we spend between 4 and 5%. There's no reason for us to subsidize European defense, while every other aspect of our government we're looking at for cuts. I understand that many of the troops stationed in Europe have in the past been deployed to Iraq and Afghanistan. My amendment is consistent with that. Currently 13,000 troops stationed in Germany and Iraq are deployed in our theaters of operation. My amendment would allow for that to continue. It allows for 35,000 troops, well within the number that are currently deployed in actual theaters where we have a strategic interest. Nor does my amendment signal any kind of weakening of our commitment to NATO. With modern technology, we can move troops and weapons quickly across the globe when needed. My amendment would still allow for 35,000 troops to remain in Europe so they can do joint exercises with NATO. It's time for us to rethink our defense spending. We are not under threat in Europe. Maintaining a network of bases of Europe is not a rational or effective response to the terrorist threat, nor is it fiscally responsible. These cuts are not my idea. They're based on recommendations from the Sustainable Defense Task Force, a bipartisan project organized by Congressman Frank, Congressman Paul, Congressman Jones, and Senator Wyden. It's backed by a number of credible organizations: Cato Institute, Taxpayers for Common Sense, Center for American Progress, Center for Defense Information, National Security Network, and others. Even Donald Rumsfeld believes it's time to change our policy. This is his quote from his recent book. Of the 250,000 troops deployed abroad in 2011, more than 100,000 were in Europe. The vast majority stationed in Germany to fend off an invasion by a Soviet Union that no longer exists. I believe our troops have more to do than serve as symbols of security blankets for wealthy allied nations, end quote. When even Donald Rumsfeld admits that this policy doesn't make sense and isn't cost justified, we must seriously reconsider our policy of maintaining bases in regions that are clearly peaceful and pose no threat. Let's get serious about balancing the budget and find savings in every agency, including DoD. Reducing our military and presence in Europe is low-hanging fruit. This will save money. The time is now. The time was last year. The time was 3 years ago after the fall of the Soviet Union. There fails to be a strategic rationale to obtain our current troop levels or expenditure levels in the European theater. My amendment will save taxpayer money and improve military preparedness for conflicts in zones where America has a strategic imperative to fight the global war on terrorism. I urge a yes vote on the amendment. I yield back.